We're going to do flow and float notes. So now you're going to be able, what we're going to do today is be able to make it so our website has 2 columns. So we can put things next to each other instead of everything coming one after the other. So I'll put it in the chat too. Flow and float notes. And go ahead and file save or file save as. Remember, change it from TXT to an HTML. So you're going to actually have to scroll down and find your HTML. We're just going to call it, I'm going to do flow float notes. .html. Let's go ahead and save that and go ahead and make another new. And go ahead and save that one as well. File save as. Just because we're going to need a CSS file, go ahead and save it as a CSS. And I just want to call my notes CSS. Okay. So let's go ahead and get the base structure of our I'll give you guys one more second to actually save. So you're making an HTML file and a CSS file inside of that folder. You can call it notes.css, float notes.html, whatever. Index site CSS. Just make sure it's saved. I called it flow float notes.html. Jacob, get into WebEx too. I called the CSS notes.css. If you know your base HTML structure, you can go ahead and start coding that. So your base structure for the website, go ahead and start coding that if you know it. Don't forget to close everything. So we need our HTML tag, our head, our body. Inside our head, we need meta, char set equals UTF-8. We need a title. What's our title again? What's our title do again? Yep, it's what's on the tab. So we'll just go ahead and call flow and float. That's what I like to call it. And we're going to go ahead and link our CSS. So link rel equals style sheet. Href is whatever you called your CSS, so mine was notes.css. And then type CSS. And then your body, of course, your header. Nav. I just want you guys to get in the habit of every time you do a document, just getting this part set up. Main and footer. Did I leave anything out? No, that should be it. I'm sorry. My HTML up here should be lowercase. So when I do my doc type, that should be lowercase. Alright, so I'll give everyone another minute to get to there. Alright, so the box model, we're just going to use the main for now. And inside the main, go ahead and we're just going to go ahead and make a div. And we're going to go ahead and give it an ID, a box. And go ahead and close your div. I want to use this to show you guys how you do all your spacing. Okay? There's multiple different ways. You know when you guys normally are coding, everything goes right up to the edge? Has everyone noticed that? Yes? Okay. So it always goes right up to the edge. When you guys look at websites, does it go right up to the edge typically? No. It has this extra space called white space there. And it's just breathing room, okay? You always want to have some type of breathing room there. So inside your div, we're just going to go ahead and put a paragraph just so we can see our text. Because if you don't put anything inside of a div, remember the div just effectively doesn't work. There's nothing there if you don't put anything inside of it. And we'll just type, this is our box. And go ahead and hit Control S to save frequently. If you don't know that shortcut, Control S on your keyboard is save in pretty much every single program. So just while you're working every so often, just hit Control S, get into the habit of it, and save as you work. I want you to go over to your notes, and we're going to go ahead and do an ID. What is it period or pound symbol for an ID? In CSS, who remembers? No one remembers? Pound symbol, yes. So we're going to go ahead and do box. So go ahead, type your ID for box. And go ahead and open it up. And you know me, I like to open and close at the same time. And we have our content. So our content's already in its own box. But we kind of want to push. Let's go ahead and just give it a color, just so we see what's going on. So we're going to give it a background color. So we're going to give it a background color. And I'm just going to do red for now, only because I just wanted to see what it looks like. Alright. So inside our box, normally we'll have, the content will go all the way to the red, okay? But we want to push it in, okay? We want to give some breathing room on the inside of the box. So to do that, we have to do what's called padding. And with these, at any time, if you do just padding, it's going to do all four sides, okay? If you do padding bottom, left, right, top, that's how you can control each side, depending on what you want. We're just going to do padding, do all four around it. And we're going to give it a padding of, say, 10 pixels. Okay? And go ahead and put a comment in, a comment tag for CSS, and put padding is space on the inside of the box. So go ahead, save that, and open up your folder inside a web browser. Go ahead and open up your HTML file. Oops. And something happened to my CSS. Okay, sorry, take out the type tag on your link. All right, does everyone have the red box? There was, in your link tag, there was a type here. Go ahead and remove the type. When you guys get the red box, go ahead and put a 1 into the chat for me. Now, if you notice, on your Google, or on your web browser, it's not sitting necessarily on the inside. So go back to your CSS, and let's just change this padding to 100 pixels. And go ahead and hit Control Save, Control S. And go back and refresh your web browser. I want you all to see the difference. Notice how it changed on all four sides, not just the center. Everyone got that? Okay, so now it's basically, it pushes the content inward. Okay, padding, think of it as you have a box that you're getting ready to ship, or your Amazon box that came in. The content's in the center, but to fill all that extra space, they have to put those packing peanuts, or I think they're like the airbags now, or bubble wrap or something in there. So padding is always, we have our box, which is our screen, or however much you say this, but it's padding goes on the inside, okay? Think of it as you're packing a box, you always put your padding so it doesn't get broken on the inside. Go back to your CSS, and we're going to put the next one, which is margin. Again, if you notice, we have margin bottom, left, top, right. You can adjust each of these individually, or you can do it all around. So for margin, go ahead and put 50 pixels. And put in a comment there, margin is outside the box. Or it's this, I'm sorry, it's margin is space outside the box. So go ahead and save that. And then go back to Google Chrome or your web browser and go ahead and refresh. What changed? Layla? It squished the box. It made the box smaller. Okay? You know how in Microsoft Word, when you're doing MLA format, you have to put margin 1 inch all around? You guys used to that in English class? Yeah? No? Okay? That's to keep it from going to the very edge. You typically don't want your page, or at least any box holding the content, to go to the very edge, because it's exhausting to look and it's just awkward to look at that. So you always want to add some kind of margin to bring it in. You don't want everything to go straight to the edge. You want to keep it kind of inside contained. So if you're placing things like on your desk, you normally don't place everything next to each other. You give it some space. Again, this is breathing space. It's called white space. Even though it may not necessarily always be white, it's called white space, as in there's no content there. All right, go ahead and go back to your CSS. And we have another one called border. Have you guys used your border yet so far? Okay, so border, we're just going to go ahead and add like 5 pixels. And go ahead and save. And go back here and refresh. Oops, that didn't work. Hold on 1 second. Oh, I'm sorry. You need to do border. Border has a lot of tags, so we're going to do border. It's border width. Let me double check myself. Oh, I'm sorry. Erase that. It's going to be border style. And go ahead and do solid. There are multiple different ones. There's solid, there's double, there's dots, there's dashed. And then we're going to need to add border. I can't type this morning. Border width. So we're going to have multiple lines of CSS for this. And go ahead and just do 5 pixels, just so we can see it. Go ahead and save that. And refresh. Okay, what happened to my border? Thank you. Border is one of those finicky ones where you need a couple different things. Well, that should work. Okay, let's add border color. Unless I'm just going to do black. Luca?
You misspelled solid.
I missed what?
You misspelled solid.
Thank you. Guys, in all honesty, my mind is still on Thanksgiving break with you guys. Right. Go ahead and go back and refresh. There we go. Now we have our border. Our border is basically, if you're one of my design kids, you know it as a stroke around the box. That's all it is the line around the box. So in your CSS, just make a note or make another comment. Border is the line of the box. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with spacing, but it has to do with the fact that you are defining where it is. Okay? You can make it thicker, you can change the style, you can do whatever. There's multiple different things you can do with borders. But I just want you guys to see where the edge is from padding to margin. Okay? And as another thing to remember, padding, I'm going to add another comment in here. Padding makes the box bigger. Whereas your margin is transparent, which basically means it's a transparent. Sorry, I can't spell this more. Transparent. So it's basically the same as your back. It's transparent, so you're not adding anything to the box. You're just putting the spacing there. You're basically showing more of the background, is what it is. All right, so go back to your CSS. And we're going to do with flow now. How does everything flow when you have multiple boxes, okay? And when I say boxes, I mean like divs. When you have multiple divs, you have multiple elements. I'm just trying to use the box to get you guys to see it. So go ahead and add another div underneath. And we're going to give it an ID of, oops, we're just going to call it second for our second box. Go ahead and close your div. Oops. And go ahead and put another paragraph tag in here and just type this is our second box. So you're making another div, putting the paragraph tag inside of it. This is our second box, and you give it an ID of second. Back in our CSS, I want you to just go ahead and copy this. Change the ID to second. Change our background color to blue. And just remove the margin. Actually, no, remove margin and padding. So your next ID should be second. It should have background color blue, border styles. We'll go ahead and just change it up just so you see different ones. We'll go ahead and call it dotted. And go ahead and save that. And when you refresh your page, you should get another box down here. Remember, we removed our padding and our margin, so it's going to go right to the edge of the page. And notice how this is how most of your CSS has, or HTML has been so far, of one thing coming after the other. If you go back to your HTML, I want you to play around with this. Go ahead and take the div for second, and we're just going to cut it. And I want you to paste it inside the other div. And hit save. And refresh your page and what changed. So take your second div and cut it. And I want you guys to paste it inside your other div. When you refresh your web page, what happened? Brianna, what happened? It did. So when I refresh mine, it's no longer outside, it's inside. But notice how it got pushed inside too? So that margin and everything, this is part of our new content in there. So it will hold any of the same properties as the outside until you change it. So when things are nested together, which means they're one inside the other, this is what happens. You got an outer box, and now you've got an inside box. Where if you just go with the flow of putting things one after the other, that's exactly how they come, one after the other. All right, let's go back to our HTML and go ahead and take the div, our second div out, and put it back outside. So we're back to having two separate divs instead of one div inside the other. And now we're going to do what's called floating. Floating is where we get one thing to go to the left and one thing to go to the right. So they're not necessarily, so now they're next to each other instead of one after the other. So go to your CSS, actually save your HTML real quick. Then go to your CSS. On the box, so in our box ID, we're going to go ahead and put float. And there's really only two kinds of float. You got float left and float right. Okay? That's all there is to float. It's float left and float right. So we're going to go ahead and float left. And our second, go ahead and float right. And save that. Refresh your web page and what happens? What happened when you refresh your web page? Carter. What happened when you refresh your web page? Yes, they went left and right. And notice something else. They only took up the size of the content that was there. So if that's all I have in my divs, they're going to float. This one is going to go straight to the right, and this one's going to go straight to the left. Whereas if I had more content in both of these, they would kind of like meet up and then flow. So if I take the one that says this is our second row, or this is our second box, I'm just going to copy and paste that sentence inside that paragraph tag a couple times. And when I refresh my web page, okay, this is now too much here. What's best to do, and this is how you're going to set up a 2-column layout, you're going to set the width on each one. So now if the two can't fit nicely next to each other, because the browser doesn't know how much space to give each one, who gets their full width? Does the first box or does the second box? If I put the two of them next to each other, did the HTML go ahead and decide which one got the full width and which one had to get cut short? Jacob, did they? No, they didn't. So now we have to tell it, okay, how much of each, it just moves, right, Luke? It just moves one of them, okay? Now we have to tell it how wide we want each one. So in our second, you can do this with your, okay, so go ahead and type width, because we're going to tell it how wide we want it to make each div. You can do this with pixels, with EMs, which is actually the size of the M in whatever font you're using. Okay, that's an EM. I prefer percentages, okay, because we're going to start making our designs responsive, which means as you resize the browser, they automatically resize. So if I'm taking my browser and changing how many pixels wide it is, and I say the box left is 100 pixels, box right is 600 pixels. Is that going to, do you think that's going to float, like, continually change proportionally when I change my browser? No, Luca, it's not. Okay? But if we use percentages, it's going to stay in proportion. Okay? So for width on the second, let's go ahead and make that 70%. Okay? So we got 70% of a width. In our box, we'll go ahead and make this one 10%. You always want to keep it under like 95%, okay? When you total the two together, you want to keep them under 95%. Only because once you start getting close to 100, it just starts acting really weird. It just acts up and starts getting really, really weird. And sometimes we'll drop one down below, whatever. So instead of doing 30, we're just going to do 10%. And go ahead and save that and refresh your web page. What happened? Jacob D, what happened? It did. And notice how they're just sharing their space now? If I take my browser, that's a little too small. But if I take my browser and notice how I'm resizing it, it's automatically resizing with it. But because I have my margin and my padding on my red box set in pixels, because I have it set in pixels, when it's no longer going to take up 10% of the screen, okay, it's going to drop the next box down. So a lot of times with your margin, your padding, and your width, you're going to want to put them in percentages. So let's go ahead and change our padding. Let's do 5%. And please note, when you put it in percentages, it's the percentage of not the total width, so not the width of the screen, but the width of your div, okay? So I'm not doing 5% of 100%, I'm doing 5% of the 10% of the width. Does that make sense? Nods? Yes, no? No? Okay. So in math, if you're trying to take 5% of 10%, okay, you're not trying to take your whole dollar. You're not trying to take the whole dollar of it. I gave you 10 cents. Now you need to figure out 5% of the 10 cents. Okay? Does that make a little bit more sense? And let's change our margin to 4%. Now, margin does factor into the entire percentage. All right. So remember, padding does not factor into the whole percentage for the entire width of the screen, but margin does because it's outside the box. Okay? So you have to remember, you have to take your margins and your width and add them up and make sure they come up to like under 90. I usually try to keep it under 90 or 95%. So we have 70, 84. Okay, that should be good. So go ahead and save that and refresh your web page. Oops, I didn't save it. And notice now when I try to resize, it doesn't drop the next box down because it's until I get like really close, okay? Because of the fact that now I'm using percentages, it's just, it allows it to be proportional, okay? When you use pixels, it's a set size, but when you use percentages, it's proportional. Like you can always take 10% of 100, 200, 300. But you can't always take 100 pixels out of, if it's only 70 pixels wide, you can't take 100 pixels. Does that make sense? And basically, this is how you do a multi-column layout. So on your websites, when you start making more than one column, like you want 2 columns, 3 columns. The Crooms website, I think at one point has like 4 columns. This is how you do it. But if I go ahead and go back to your HTML, and go into your footer and just add a paragraph into your footer and just say this is a footer. If I do that and I just leave my floats how they are and I refresh, it floated to wherever the last one is, so it floated to the right. Okay? On a footer on a website, does it normally stick with the main section or is it on its own? Anthony, it's on its own. So what we have to do is now we added an extra element, so our HTML, our CSS is getting confused. What we have to do is go back into our CSS, and we have to so go ahead and put your footer element in there. And in there, we need to add a clear, okay? We need to tell it, you know what, those floats that we had earlier, now I want you to clear and reset. Okay? Oh, it should be clear both. Okay, so you're not just clearing the left, you're not just clearing the right. You're clearing both. You don't want it to float anymore, okay? You want it to be on its own. Otherwise, it tends to just follow whatever the last one is, which is sloppy coding. So we're not going to do that. If you're going to float something, you're going to float and then clear afterwards. So go ahead and save that. And refresh your web browser again. And now the footer is back down by itself, okay? Now the code is no longer confused. It's like, oh, wait, now I don't have to stick to whatever was before. I can just go on my own, okay? We have cleared it of any confusion now. And sometimes, I almost always clear my footer, mostly because that's usually when I stop using it. But if you start using 2 boxes and then you have 3 and then maybe you have another 2, you can also use a break tag if you need to. Put a break tag in and give it an ID of clear and clear both from it. But again, you guys can use a break. So I like to give my breaks an ID of clear so that way I know when I have to clear something. So obviously I'll go back to my CSS, add another ID. Actually, what you can do really is go ahead and take out your footer and just add an ID of clear. And so it always clears both, and just add that ID to your footer as well. So anytime you need it to clear, you might as well go ahead and just create an ID or a class and do clear. And use that. Now, if you want to do 3 columns, how do you guys think we do 3 columns? What? We have a float middle? Sorry, what? So we still only have left and right. So actually what we have to do is we have to... No, Luke, we don't do a third div with float right. Okay? The best way to do it, actually, and I just want to double check, make sure I'm telling you the same thing, is you're actually going to do a div. So we may call this div with an ID of left. Oops. Go ahead and close it. And I'm just going to copy and paste this because we're going to need to go to right. And most people like to just, this is just something a lot of programmers like to do, especially when they're doing float left, float right. They literally call their IDs left or right, or float left, float right, whatever. It just makes it so much simpler when you're thinking about it. Don't try to come up with some creative name like give it an ID of Batman. Don't do that. Unless you're making a Batman website, don't give it an ID of Batman. You're really going to confuse yourself. But then inside, now that div, and honestly this might be even an easier way of showing it, is copy and paste that. And now inside this div, you have to make another float left and float right. Thank you. Okay? So even inside, so we do a left and right, and then inside our right, we do another left and right. So go ahead and we'll go ahead and just put in some paragraphs there so we can see what's going on. And we'll just say box 1. And again, this is literally just so you can see what's going on. You would normally add a lot more CSS to this. Box 2. And box 3. And now when we go into our CSS, obviously we're going to have to make left and right. So we'll go ahead and do left. And we'll just do float left. I'm sorry. Oops. And we'll do a right. So we can float right. And go ahead and save that. And refresh your web browser. And you'll notice now we have box 1. And our box 2 and box 3 are all the way over here on the right-hand side. So this is, again, a scenario where you're going to have to play with your divs. Play with your widths of your divs. And play with your margins to get it to look proportionally right. Okay? So this is when you start putting things inside each other. So we have a div and ID of left, and then a div of right with two more divs inside of it. And you can nest as many divs as you want inside of each other, but make sure they have some content in them. So don't leave anything, like, don't leave completely blank. So if I took out ID left and just took out box 2, and you're not going to use that div at all, go ahead and take it out. You don't want to necessarily leave empty lines of code in there. Okay, Luke, so yes, you can do a third div with float right, and it does work. This is a much cleaner way of coding because it is a lot easier to start manipulating it, and it keeps it organized, because when you start floating right, you can't float. The code starts getting confused. Like if you try to do a fourth div and you put float right and now you have 3 divs floating right, it starts getting a little confused sometimes. The code, it doesn't always work well. Whereas if you do it like this, it keeps it a whole lot cleaner, and it allows you to manipulate the elements easier when you just have one float left and a float right. And then because there is no float middle, it's one of those things where yes, it does technically work, but it's not good coding practices. Okay? So does everyone have both of these? All right. What I want you guys to do is go ahead and save this. Remember, you can make a 2-column if you want your nav to be on the left and your main to be on the right. You can do that. You use the same techniques, just instead of the words div, you use the others. You use nav or main. But typically, always clear your footer, okay? Your footer is almost never going to be floated. Just clear your footer, and then if you need to make more columns inside your footer, that's fine. Just always clear at the end. Does that make sense for everyone? Go ahead and put 2 in the chat if that makes sense. Okay. What I want you guys to do is go ahead and save and zip this file. So make sure both of these are saved. Go ahead and zip it. And I'm going to open up the assignment on eCampus for you guys to submit.